So guys, this is Luke Ewan here of SimBoxx, and I'm glad to welcome you to SimBoxx Presents Let's Talk Boxing, a new, fresh outlook on all things boxing. This, of course, is a debut episode, and we'll be looking at the huge Andy Ruiz Joshua rematch for the unified heavyweight titles coming up on December 7th. I'm delighted to introduce my co-host of Rebel Boxing, Mr. Ewan Breeze. How are you doing, Ewan?
Yeah, good, thanks, Luke. Good, excited as always for Saturday night.
Yeah, good to hear from you, mate. You know, it's a really big fight, and one I'm really looking forward to watching, but also to breaking down this evening with yourself and, getting our thoughts out there of what we believe may or may not happen, our thoughts on everything in the build-up. I'm really excited to be speaking to you tonight.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is a monumentous event in heavyweight boxing. 127 years since John L. Sullivan was crowned the inaugural heavyweight champion. It's been contested 283 times, and only 23 of those have been rematches. So, and obviously, the Dempsey Tunnies and Lennox Lewis and Muhammad Ali have some of their best nights have all been rematches. So it's absolutely going to be one of something that will go down in boxing history, in my opinion.
Fantastic. So I'm glad you're here to shed your knowledge on past boxing. I know that's something you're really passionate about, and it's something that is invaluable in terms of the things that we're going to be going over with tonight. So it's a monumental occasion. It's a big fight, and hopefully we do it justice with this breakdown.
Yeah, exciting times. I'm got a few points ready to make. I'm looking forward to this one.
Fantastic. So obviously this podcast, it's been a bit of an idea for a while for us. What better time to start? And one thing that I've wanted to stress, obviously with us at SimBoxx, is that we don't proclaim to be any kind of boxing expert. We're passionate fans. Of course, we're passionate fans, and this is just like a platform for us to get our opinion out there. If people like it, great. If they disagree, that's cool as well. Obviously as long as all the good feedback comes to SimBoxx and the not so good can be channeled back to at Rebel Boxing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always up for a good debate with anyone. I'm sure anyone that follows my Twitter will know that I like getting right stuck in with everybody who likes to disagree with me. I've got no problem with that whatsoever.
Yeah, of course, like you say, there might be some mistakes along the way. There might be things that aren't factually correct. We're going to do our very best to keep up with everything. But I suppose that's all part of the banter. We're here to learn and give it a crack, really. And it's something that I'm certainly passionate about. And speaking to you throughout the week, I know it's something that you're clearly passionate about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Heavyweight boxing is always what I've been interested in boxing. I think there's nothing more important for me than heavyweight boxing. I know that'll get me a lot of stick as well, but nothing is like in boxing is nothing like a heavyweight championship fight, and that's why I'm so eager to make this our debut and make it the best we can make it. And obviously, like you say, we are fans. I'm no authority on boxing. I'm just, like I say, I've just read a lot, I've watched a lot, and I want to get stuck in and give my opinion on this monumentous fight.
Definitely. So, I think the best place for us to start would be, let's go back to the announcement of Andy Joshua and Jarrell Miller, as it were, which is going to be contesting the unified WBA, WBO, and IBF heavyweight titles. It was scheduled for June 1st, of course, in New York. It's now becoming almost infamous due to the failed drug test of Jarrell Miller. So I think we'll take it from the announcement of Jarrell Miller failing his drug test, his 3 drug tests, which is fucking unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then obviously the search for an opponent, and finally we came to Andy Ruiz. So if we go back to when Jarrell, was taken out of that main event, what was your thoughts at that time, Ian?
Well, firstly, I think it's absolutely disgusting. There's one thing, if obviously we've had some murky situations in boxing with your clenbuterols and whatever, but EPO is injected. It is an injected steroid. It's what Lance Armstrong got tested for. It's cheating on the highest level, and cheating in boxing is a lot worse than cheating in other sports, because ultimately you're trying to hurt your opponent. And I just want to reiterate the fact that Jarrell Miller is a disgusting human being, and he should be banned for life. He shouldn't be in boxing, in my opinion. But then, the search was on for a new opponent, and I actually was one. I liked Andy Ruiz Jr. as an opponent. I think he's just as credible. I think obviously Ortiz would have been the primary one, but I thought Andy Ruiz is not far off on the list of opponents. It was him and maybe Michael Hunter were the top opponents. Who did you see as being your top choices when Miller did fall out?
Obviously, when your mind always goes to, you want the bigger fights, and any excuse to try and get Wilder in there or Fury in there, it was never going to happen, but, we can dream of the biggest fights. But, you take those two out of it. I think for me, Luis Ortiz was the one, I think he was a credible opponent, as you can see by the performance he put in recently in the rematch, his rematch with Deontay Wilder. Obviously ended in a 7th round KO win for Wilder, but for the opening 6.5 rounds, Ortiz was boxing his head off, and so I think he's definitely a relevant player in the heavyweight division, and if he had stepped in on June 1st, I think that would have been my ideal opponent to replace Joe Miller.
Yeah, but then obviously Andy Ruiz proved himself that he was just as relevant as a contender as Ortiz or Hunter or anyone else with his performance on June 1st.
Yeah, 100%. So let's, we'll go to the point of, Ruiz is confirmed. The naysayers and the internet trolls, came out in force, and he was ridiculing this man for his physical appearance and his almost like kind-hearted nature, which obviously, he made everyone eat the words and some more.
Yeah. I actually got into an argument with one of my my friends who's not really into boxing, but he said, he's like, what a disgusting fat slob, how he's never gonna do anything. And then I sent him a picture of two-ton Tony Gallanto, who fought Joe Louis for his heavyweight title in the 1930s. Two-ton Tony was knocking on the door of 300 pounds. He was cannonball shaped, and he put Joe Louis on his backside. And I said, anything can happen in heavyweight boxing. These men, they might look fat, but they hit very, very hard. And obviously, I didn't predict the Ruiz win, but I thought those words were kind of prophetic in the end when Ruiz did what he did, I suppose.
Yeah, of course. So if we skip forward to fight week, which was bizarre to say the least. Obviously, we had Anthony Joshua. Some people questioned his motivation, whether he was overlooking Ruiz, whether he thought Ruiz was an easier fight than Jarrell Miller, whether or not he didn't have the drive, and almost the anger that he had towards Jarrell Miller with everything that they had going on in their press conference. So it was almost like a Gentile atmosphere in fight week. It was, bizarre, I think is a word.
Yeah, and obviously you had the weird incident with Andy Ruiz holding the belt at the press conference, and everyone thinking, he's just there to get a picture because they'll never touch them for real. And there was a lot of stick online, and I participated in that. I thought it's like in football, it's unlucky to touch the cup before you've won it, that sort of thing. I thought it was kind of a weird, like I say, bizarre move from Andy Ruiz to do that in fight week.
Yeah, it was almost like he was like a competition winner, and he was happy to be there to experience everything, get a picture with the champ, get a picture with the belt. He'd take a career high payday, win, lose or draw, and then he was out of there. That was the, some people say it was an act. He says he's just a nice guy. What do you think? Do you think it was mind games? Do you think it was the plan all along?
I think my opinion is Andy Ruiz Jr. has showed that he's a fighting man. He doesn't need to get himself angry or stressed out, or he doesn't need to hate his opponent to get motivated into, ultimately trying to knock them out. I think that, his experience in boxing has always been just getting their respect and then fight your heart out when you get in there. And I think he proved that he didn't have to hate him on fight week. And obviously, Anthony Joshua was going in, like you say, to hate Miller and to have that kind of back and forth with Jarrell Miller. And then he got there, and Andy Ruiz was smiling and eating Snickers bars and taking pictures with everyone. I think ultimately, I don't think he was trying to play a mind game, but I think he ended up playing a mind game because Anthony Joshua was in that state of anger and of hatred towards his opponent, and Ruiz was kind of just jovial about it all.
Yeah, definitely. And if it wasn't that, then bravo. He duped everybody, literally everybody that fight week, culminating in obviously the weigh-in. And Joshua came in, body beautiful as he always does, built like a Greek god. And then you had Andy Ruiz, not so great, not so easy on the eye. Which obviously, we're going to touch on All Carted for Nothing, of course. But back before the events of Fight Night, surely nobody was looking at those two fighters unless he was Mexican, um, and actually believing that Andy Ruiz was in any way, shape, or form going to even trouble Joshua. Never mind win the fight, just trouble him. It would have took a brave man to have bet on Andy Ruiz at that point. Just looking at the pure physical state, which obviously, as boxing fans, we know isn't the case, but Joshua, he relates, and he's a boxing figure for more than just boxing fans. He transcends into the casual market and beyond. And these fans only look at physical appearances, and yeah, I think at that point there was only one winner in 99% of the people's eyes.
Yeah, not only is he like you say an amazing physical specimen, he's a massive star,
Yeah.
and he's physically and massive in terms of his public appeal. He's huge, and everybody saw the two of them stood together and thought only one person can win this fight. And even people in boxing like ourselves who have watched more boxing than the casual fan thought, like, even though Andy Ruiz was a more credible opponent, actually he is still going in there like a lamb to the slaughter. Anthony Joshua is too good, too big, too strong. And then, like say, proved us all wrong. And it is hard. It's hard to eat your words, but you just have to admire the achievement of Andy Ruiz in that sense, of that he had everything: reach, height, size, strength, all going against him. And yet, as we know, boxing isn't about any of those things. Sometimes it just comes down to who wants it more, who is the better man on the night.
Yeah, of course. Now, just before we move on to fight night, and we'll quickly break that down before we move on to everything else. How much of a part do you believe Deontay Wilder played with the psyche of Anthony Joshua in the fight week and the build-up to an already disrupted fight camp with obviously the change of opponent? The Wilder name was chucked in there, obviously as if the Ruiz fight was already won. He had to just turn up, win, and then we could pursue the undisputed fight with Wilder. How much do you think that played a part in the psyche of Anthony Joshua and as a distraction, maybe?
I think the 12 months prior to the fight had been massive, because if you're a fighter training for a fight, you've got that opponent in your mind all the time, looking forward, thinking that is the person I need to beat. And obviously for 12 months there was negotiations and it was back and forth. It was Luda Bella, Stephen Espinoza, Eddie Hearn, Barry Hearn, and it was this whole saga of, played out through IFL often, played out through all these different media outlets of he said, she said, as to these negotiations, and Bob Arum just calling them all idiots, and it just became this saga which can only play into Wilder's hands, as he is there with lined up opponents with Al Heyman and PBC, and Joshua is the one that's fighting to try and get that fight, in my opinion. And I think that when you're constantly thinking, I'm getting slated for having these subpar opponents, while Wilder doesn't get any hate, and I'm trying to make that fight, that has to give Wilder the psychological edge, I think, and kind of fatigue the mind of AJ as he prepares for the fights that he isn't really getting up for because they aren't Wilder.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I can agree with that. I did, like you say, I did think that he played a massive part. His eye wasn't on the ball, and AJ, he talks a good game. He's great in front of a camera, but I don't think he was fooling anybody that he was 100% focused on Andy Ruiz as an opponent or as a threat, with the possibility of the undisputed fight. That again, I agree with that. I do believe AJ was chasing it more than Team Wilder, so the drive and the frustration was certainly there in terms of chasing that undisputed fight. But moving on to fight night, we obviously seen Andy Ruiz make the walk to the ring, and then there was of course the delay. And I think at this point, I wouldn't say eyebrows were raised, but there was a seed planted as if to say, this isn't the swashbuckling, all-conquering behemoth, that Anthony Joshua usually is when he's making his ring walk, whether it be at Wembley, Cardiff, in front of 60, 70, 80, 90,000 people. There was obviously the delay, and then obviously eventually he started his ring walk. And something, for me, I'm not sure what you think yourself, Ewan, but for me, it just didn't seem right from the get-go.
Yeah, I think the weird thing for me watching it back is I didn't even really notice it on the night. Granted, I had been out in Liverpool the day they won the Champions League final, but I didn't notice at the time. But then watching it back, the weird massaging of the neck and chewing on the mouthpiece, it seemed off.
Yeah.
It seemed, if you watch the great fights, the great fighters, they are so in the zone. If you watch a Sugar Ray Leonard fight, he's bouncing, he won't stop moving. Obviously, the famous incidents with Marvin Hagler punching himself in the face. Ali, he would never stand still, right? And AJ had his feet planted, chewing on his mouthpiece, getting a massage. It's just not what you would like to see from your fighter ready to go in a life or death boxing match. It seems negative looking back on it, and I think even more so when you know the result. I think it looks, with the beauty of hindsight is you see that there's clearly something wrong with him in that corner before he's even gone out. He's either not motivated or he's injured or he is even bored. He's not ready for a life or death unified heavyweight championship fight.
Yeah, definitely. Like you say, the almost too relaxed manner. It weren't even like it was a usual Anthony Joshua relaxed pose. Like you say, his elbows were up on the top rope. He was leaning back. And I watched the fight back this week, and I didn't notice it on fight night. As you say, you miss things on the night. But there's actually a member of Team AJ up on the apron, almost giving him a pep talk. Geeing him up in his ear. And I know, this isn't uncommon. People like to be, shouted at and motivated different ways, but this was out of the norm for Anthony Joshua. And you could just see this team member, like, in his ear, really trying to psych him up as if like he needed that extra boost, that almost to wake him up. It was just really strange.
Yeah, he seemed out of it. He seemed like he wasn't laser focused in a way that you need to be. If you watch, say, a Deontay Wilder fight at the moment, he walks in and he has this. Obviously, he calls it the Bronze Bomber persona, but every fighter has it. They get into the zone, and AJ just didn't look like he could get his head into the zone, and that would fit with the pep talk and everything. He needs that. It's like everybody knew that he wasn't quite there.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously going into the fight, we had Anthony Joshua at 22-0, all conquering, won every fight. All but one by knockout. And then we had Andy Ruiz, 32-1. The sole defeat was a contentious defeat to, at the time, the WBO heavyweight champion of the world, Joseph Parker, which again, is highly disputed. But Ruiz, for me, he always looked like he knew everything was coming to plan. It's as if he envisaged everything that was going to happen, and it was happening exactly how he wanted it to go down.
Except for the knockdown in the third round. I mean, I think AJ's trademark right uppercut left hook, which is a vicious weapon, and it lands. But then, like you say, it's, for me, the moment where everything you said comes into fruition is when he stands up from that shot and his eyes don't ever glaze. You know what I mean? He takes, a 6 foot, what is Joshua, 6'6", 245-pound man, throws two of the most feared punches in boxing at him. He crashes down with his arm behind his back, and his eyes don't ever glaze. He never seems out of it, and he stands back up, and he looks just more pissed off than anything. He doesn't look in any way hurt or foggy or glazed. His legs are set under him, and that is when, for me, what you say comes into fruition. He says, all right, okay, is that the best you can throw? Because you've hit me twice clean, and I'm fine. Now it's my turn. Do you know what I mean? He had that thing of that mental clarity to stand up and then get, right, okay, now I see the fight. Now this is how I see the fight going. I've tasted your power, and there's nothing you can do to hurt me, sort of thing. That's how I see it, as from when he stands up from that knockdown.
So if we take it from that point there, I remember watching the fight back, and obviously watching it at the time live, and both times, I was just in awe. I did feel Anthony Joshua, on the back of Wilder's stunning knockout of Brazil, in May, that he felt he had to make a statement, and that's what led to him going gung ho, and charging in his eyes to finish the job of Andy Ruiz. And he just, he got clipped. There's no other way to describe it. Like you say, Andy Ruiz wasn't shell shocked. He wasn't glazed. He was still composed. It was a heavy knockdown, but It was the only knockdown he's suffered in his career at that point, and obviously up until today. And he was comfortable, and he timed Joshua. You know, he was comfortable in close when he was letting bombs go, and you know he just outfought, out hustled, and outmaneuvered Anthony Joshua, and obviously he landed some really big punches. What was your thoughts at that point?
I mean, I was impressed that he had taken the punch first, but then he also had the wherewithal to come back to his game plan.
Yep.
So watching, I wrote a Taylor the Tape article before it, and I said that the only way, I was very sceptical about Andy Ruiz's chances of beating Joshua, but I said if he's going to do it, he has to use a check left hook. Ruiz obviously, but also Povetkin and White, the only two shots that have ever really troubled Joshua, they were both catch left hooks. They're both, as Joshua throws an uppercut left hook, you have to dodge the uppercut and slip and then throw the left hook as he does it. And White hurt him badly with it, and Povetkin dropped his legs in the first round. His legs had a wobble.
Yep. And
I said that that's the best shot to try and catch him with, is as he throws that combination, you check it. And obviously Ruiz, just fresh off the canvas, has the clarity in his head to think, right, when he throws that, I need to slip to my left and throw a left hook. And he does it, and he lands absolutely cleanly just behind the ear, which is, you know, as we know, watching boxing, it can ruin your equilibrium. Your balance just goes completely, and you can't get your legs back under you. And Ruiz got up and he threw that shot straight away. And it's the speed in which he gets up and then starts throwing, and he throws the perfect shot to beat Anthony Joshua. It's almost superhuman in his ability to recover, and then recover smart and throw the right punches, not just loads of punches. He throws the right punch to beat a guy who has the susceptibility to that punch. I think it's phenomenal. It blew me away on the night, and it blows me away even watching it now. I've watched it twice this week, and I think that the clarity in his head to be able to throw that shot is just unbelievable.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it was an amazing round of boxing. Obviously, you know, Joshua would beat the count the first time. He'd be dropped again in that third round, and he'd beat the count just. The second time at the end of the round, you know, the bell saved him, and it was just a stunning round of boxing. You know, however many people was in Madison Square Garden that night, you know, I think collectively, everybody's jaw was on the floor. They was in awe, they was in shock, they was in amazement. It was just a brilliant round of boxing, a brilliant round of heavyweight boxing, at the pinnacle of the sport.
Yeah, all I could think watching the round, I was jumping up and down, and all I could think was Buster Douglas, Mike Tyson, round 8. And in round 8, Mike Tyson lands an absolute beautiful uppercut on Buster Douglas, nearly takes his head off, and Douglas goes down heavy, the same way Anthony Joshua doesn't he? But he comes back up, and he keeps fighting, and Tyson doesn't know what to do. He's lost in the ring, and Douglas keeps throwing and throwing and throwing, eventually knocks Mike Tyson out in the 10th. But it's that thing of, Andy Ruiz was doing it, and I obviously look back and I watch documentaries, I read books, and that is seen as one of the biggest upsets. And I suddenly was aware that I was watching something of that magnitude. Yeah. When Anthony Joshua fell down for the second time, I thought, this is absolutely unbelievable. I'm witnessing history, and I just, like I say, I couldn't sit still. It was blowing my mind. I was really thinking about my mind was flashing through heavyweight history, and I kept sticking back to Buster Douglas because it seemed to be that level of an upset at that point as it was going. Obviously, I'm a Joshua fan, but you have to respect the historical impact of that round on the pantheon of heavyweight champions and the great fights that we've had.
Yeah. So, you know, moving from there into the fourth, the fifth, Joshua, he attempted to get back behind his jab, and keep it at range. And he just didn't, he didn't seem right. And something that I did want to touch on and get your opinion on is what do you think of the conversations that were going on in the corner of Anthony Joshua in between rounds? The questions he was asking of Rob McCracken, his trainer. I think some of the words he was using was, what should I do next? Or what is he going to do next? And then he was asking which punch it was that put him down. But, these questions were from the end of the first round, so it wasn't as if it was a result of him being dropped in the third. It was happening at the end of the first, the end of the second, and throughout the fight. What's your opinion on on that, you?
I think that it is obviously a weird thing to see. It's bizarre. You don't often see fighters talking at all in the corner. They listen.
Yeah.
But obviously Anthony Joshua was so vocal. What it rang for me as somebody that doesn't live boxing in his muscles. And I know this is going to sound bad. Obviously, he is, unified heavyweight champion. He's obviously a fantastic boxer. But he only picked up the sport at 18, which is late for most people. If you look at most world champions, they're in the gym at like 5 or 6 or 7. And Andy Ruiz has been in the gym since he was 5 years old.
Yeah.
He knows what happens. He knows what punches there are. He knows what happens when you get hit with shots. Anthony Joshua's come in as this enormous physical specimen at 18, and he's beaten everyone. He's cruised through. Obviously, he's lost to Dylan White in the amateurs and things like that, but he doesn't have that. I get knocked down, I get up. He throws this punch, I throw that punch. He doesn't have that muscle memory in the way that Andy Ruiz did. And I think he was thinking too much in the fight. He was thinking, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Having to ask Rob McCracken these questions because he can't answer them himself, because he's not been in enough situations. He's not lived and breathed and sweat and blood boxing in the way that Andy Ruiz has coming up. And obviously, the way that, so you look at a fighter like Tyson Fury, who the same thing, Otto Wallin cuts him, he's having this horrible, dirty fight, but he doesn't get away from his boxing because he knows he's always done boxing. He put his first pair of boxing gloves on before he could walk, apparently. And
Yeah.
I think that Joshua was suffering from his lack of experience at that point. That's how I view it. But I would be interested to know if you agree.
Yeah, I'm very much inclined to agree with you. It's things that it only comes with experience. And I watched a couple of build-up programs, and there was a comment from David Hay, and he mentioned that from 10 years from Anthony Joshua walking into a boxing gym to now, the 10-year career that he's had, he's gone on to win, a unified heavyweight title and everything else, the Olympic golds, the British title, the Commonwealth title. And David Hay said, from the first time he walked into a gym and 10 years from then, he was still fighting for a European amateur title. When he was 10 years into his craft, into his career, that's the point he had reached. And it just goes to show how much of a fast track Anthony Joshua has been on from day one. It's a truly it's an unbelievable career, but it's times like now when that experience that you can't buy, you can't go back and get, is when it's needed, and he was found wanting. As simple as that.
I totally agree. I think that you can't buy experience, like you said, and it suddenly became that's an amazing stat about David Hay, that he was still fighting as an amateur after 10 years. But that is often the case. These guys have their first amateur fights at 8, 9, 10, 11,
yeah.
And then they don't turn professional until early 20s. It's a truly an apprenticeship in boxing, which Anthony Joshua hasn't had. Even when he won his Olympic gold medal, he'd been in the gym 3 or 4 years. It's something that most world champions have never had to experience, being the marketed star and being rushed through.
Yeah.
He's been given the passes because of how he looks, how he talks, how he fights, and he's not actually built foundations underneath what it was. And when you get to a hard fight, you have to think, it's not coming through, and that's why he's kind of asking these questions. What shot did he land? What will he throw next? Why am I feeling like this? It's all rings of he's just not done it before. He's suddenly learning. He's in a learning fight that he should have had, at the York Hall at the bottom of the bill, headlining Madison Square Garden. It's a difficult situation to be put in, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. If we look at the other side of the coin, what he was getting back from Rob McCracken, and again, to not directly quote some pundits, but something else that I did hear over the past week when, like I say, I've been catching up on different things, was some criticism of Rob McCracken that he wasn't giving enough detailed instructions to Anthony Joshua at a time when he needed it, and that I think he was telling him, keep him on the left jab, 1-2, and there was a number of pundits that were saying, that's elementary stuff, and that at that moment in time, Anthony Joshua needed more. more advice, more support from his corner. What do you make of that?
I personally disagree. Controversially, I suppose, but I think that if you've got a fighter who is being punched about by a 19-stone man, you're not going to be able to quote the works of Shakespeare. You're not going to be able to take in really detailed information. You're not going to be able to say you need to take a small 1-2 step forward, duck, roll left, jab. Then you need to do like invert a little right uppercut and things like that. Like, it's going to go over his head. When you've got a hurt fighter, you need to cut through all that. You need to cut through the noise of Madison Square Garden, and you need to tell him. And obviously, McCracken's fighter didn't come away with the win. But ultimately, as a coach, there's only so much you can do, in my opinion. You know, if you look back at the great trainers, you know, Angelo Dundee was famous for in the Leonard versus Hearns fight. He shouted, "You're blowing it, kids, you're blowing it." It's like, that's not any technical advice. But Leonard quotes that as the reason that he won that fight, because he had to realise the stakes, and he had to realise what he needed to do and find it in himself rather than be told it. I think that AJ's 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. I think that's good advice. You've got a little guy. You need to keep him away from you. You're hurt. Do what you know how to do. He knows how to throw a jab and a right hand. Keep him doing that and see if he can clear his head. And then once his head's clear, you can give him some more detailed advice. I think Rob McCracken was doing the right thing. I just think Anthony Joshua couldn't implement it in the ring. But that's just my opinion, obviously. But I'd be interested to know how you see that.
You know, I hate sitting on the fence, but I'm on the fence with this because I think, you know, he was scrambled, you know, and like you said, he wasn't, excuse me, there wasn't going to be too many opportunities for him to take in anything, you know, complicated, you know, this is where the difficulty comes in because obviously he was training for a different kind of opponent, but you'd like to think that in the weeks and months maybe of training camp, that he would have figured out what would happen in, you know, situation A, B, C, D, you know, and have a response ready, you know, so you wouldn't need Ron McCracken to say do this, do that, and, you know, and go through a whole breakdown of what he should be doing next. You know, like you say, the simple instructions should be all it needs, you know. And granted, you know, he didn't have a full training camp because of obviously everything we've mentioned earlier, but there still should have been enough there for Joshua to be able to adjust. Personally, that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think that's a totally valid opinion. But I think like you mentioned, I think that rings of a difficult training camp and a short training camp and a change of opponent that they didn't have enough preparation in terms of the corner. You know, Mike Tyson famously used numbers. It was throw a 6 then a 3, then throw a 6 then a 3, and that was, you know, left, right uppercut or something. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And they had a kind of code of shorthand that they built where AJ and McCracken didn't have that kind of fluidity on the night. I agree with you on that.
Okay, so as we move into the 7th and ultimately final round, as it turned out, Joshua was clearly suffering still from the heavy knockdown in the third, but also from the body shots he took up until that point, especially at the end of the 6th. I think, you know, Ruiz was landing at will as Joshua was trying to protect his chin, and they seemed to take effect. You know, the wind had clearly gone out of his sails heading into that 7th round. Do you want to take us through how you seen the 7th playing out up until the finish?
I was like you say, I thought Andy Ruiz Jr.'s body punching was genius because you see those big abs and you think, God, I don't fancy hitting that. It's going to be horrible. But AJ's had gas problems. He's had problems maintaining his punch output into the later rounds, obviously, in the Klitschko fight, Takam, and other fights. And the best way to sap somebody's energy is hitting them in the body. And Andy Ruiz pounded his body with those straight right hands to the solar plexus. And I thought that was a genius game plan. And I thought Joshua looked tired more than anything going into that 7th round. I thought those enormous muscles that look so good on the cover of Men's Health and other magazines and stuff, you know, they don't work in the 12th round of a boxing match. You are breathing heavy, trying to feed oxygen to those muscles, and you start to get tired. And, you know, for all of the fact that Andy Ruiz has, he wasn't tired in the 7th round. He was bouncing on his toes, he looked fresh, and he knew he was winning. And I think that AJ's fatigue was more a factor in that 7th round. Because, like you say, he was trying to protect his chin. He was getting hit to the body, and then he was finding that he couldn't move his legs and he was tired. And I think that was one of the major factors in that 7th round. And you can see it from his dangling left hand. He had that front. You know, some fighters have done it amazingly. Like David Hayes, you mentioned, he used to have his, you know, his big long left hand right down by his knee. He used to use that effectively, but Joshua's never ever done that before in a fight. And he spent the 6th and 7th round with it swinging around his knee. And it's like, that's not you. You're getting out of the fight. And it's because he was tired. He couldn't hold his hands up properly. And I think that that's one of the things that the major factors that ultimately led to the finish, because it wasn't a knockout. It was a referee stoppage. And I think his kind of the look of him in those rounds made the referee think this fella's not coming here to fight, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, looking at the final knockdown, you know, what brought the end to the fight, you know, it was almost just, he almost crumpled to the canvas, you know. He just, you know, his body giving, the gum shield came out. He was obviously needing oxygen, as you say, to feed those muscles. And, yeah, the fight had just been beaten out of him. Obviously, he made it to his feet, turned his back on the referee at the count of 8, and then he turned back. The referee asked him to walk forward. And, you know, the question I'm going to ask next, and it is a controversial one, and it's been asked across social media, did Anthony Joshua quit in that 7th round?
Yes. And that is very controversial. I know that. And who am I to criticise a, you know, Olympic gold medalist, multiple world champion boxer? He's, you know, he's a lot harder, a lot stronger, a lot better at boxing than I ever will be. But he didn't want to continue in that fight. He'd been knocked down twice. He'd lost the gum shield, and very reminiscent, like I already mentioned, Tyson Douglas. There's the famous picture of Mike Tyson reaching for his gum shield on the floor. Anthony Joshua wasn't doing that. He stood up, he put his elbows on the ropes, and he thought, Jesus, I don't want any more of this. He looked like he was finished. He looked like he didn't have any more, and he didn't walk to the referee. And everyone knows, like I say, that muscle memory, you put your hands on your chin and you walk to the referee. That's what everyone does, even when you can't. You know, there's the famous clip of Zab Judah when he's been knocked out and he's trying to put his hands on his chin, he's trying to watch the referee and he can't do it.
Yeah.
Joshua could have done it, but he wasn't. His legs weren't gone, his head wasn't gone, but he didn't do it. And I have to say that in the end it was because he couldn't continue. You know, he said no mas by not walking to the referee. Everyone in boxing knows that's what you do. Put your hands on your chin and you walk to the referee. And like I say, there's fighters who've been a lot more hurt who've tried, and Anthony Joshua didn't try. So obviously, controversially, I will say yes, I think he did. What about you, Luke? What do you think?
You know, I do think you make a valid argument. You know, and you know, ultimately, no one but Joshua is going to know. You know, in his heart of hearts, what he thought at the end of that 7th. Personally, watching it back, you know, a lot of me wants to say he didn't quit, but I can't find myself disagreeing with your breakdown of how you perceived it to have gone, you know. So, if I'm pushed, you know, if there was a gun to my head, then yeah, I'd say he quit. He didn't want any more. You know, he wasn't flat on his back. He had the opportunity to walk towards the referee, like you're saying, the automatic gloves up to the chin, the nod, and then go again. And he didn't want any of that. He faced the biggest, arguably the first, you know, real crisis. You know, there was obviously the Povetkin punch, the Dylan White punch, but they weren't fight-ending scenarios. You know, he'd been down multiple times, and yeah, I think he just didn't want any more at that stage.
This is the thing.
It's a question, you know. This guy's got in there. You know, he's put himself through camp, but that all goes out the window, in my opinion. Yeah, he quit.
It's a very interesting one. But then obviously he didn't quit against Klitschko. He was floored hard by somebody who there's no shame in losing to, in Vladimir Klitschko, and he pulled himself back up and he fought tooth and nail for that one. And I'm not saying that he is a quitter per se. I'm just saying on that night he didn't want to be there. And I think that I don't think it will have as much an effect as Tyson Fury or others will try and tell you it will on this rematch, because I think Joshua has both sides to him. Like every person has both sides to him. You know, you're not always going to be the hard as nails, but you're not always going to be a quitter either. And I think that although he, in my opinion, did quit in the Andy Ruiz fight, he was admirably got back to his feet and knocked out Vladimir Klitschko, one of the best heavyweights of the last 20 years. So I think that people are reading too much into the fact that he quit, but in my opinion, he did quit.
Okay, so if we if we skip by the whole conspiracy situation, which we've touched on already, and if we move past the brilliant Andy Ruiz celebration, as much as I was gutted for Joshua losing the fight, I was absolutely elated for Andy Ruiz, and the comments afterwards about him and his mum and his family are never going to have to work again. It was great. It was really inspiring. If I can quickly just get your thoughts on briefly looking at the immediate aftermath of the fight. What did you take from that?
Yeah, again, like you say, you're gutted for Joshua. We're British fight fans, of course. We wanted Joshua to win. But again, when you hear somebody say, "Now, Mum, you don't have to worry anymore," that's moving for anyone, and I think that's testament to what sport can do. He went from overnight being a fat little fighter that nobody had heard of to being one of the biggest stars in world sport, having caused one of the biggest upsets, in my opinion, of all time in the heavyweight division. And I think that nobody can be angry at Andy Ruiz for having that. Like, you have to be emotional. You have to look at him and think, actually, he's doing the best for him and his family. And ultimately, that's what all of us want to do. And, I don't think you can knock him on for that, even though we are obviously AJ fans.
Yeah, so obviously we eventually, look to the future, as we inevitably do, as Joshua and Eddie, scramble to try and repiece the empire as it is. There's no doubt, Andy Joshua is the main player in the Matchroom empire, certainly, and then we looked at the immediate rematch, which is the next subject I want to look at. What are your thoughts on Joshua taking the immediate rematch? And is this something you agree with?
I think that there's precedent both ways. I wrote an article about the history of immediate rematches in kind of the quasi-modern era of heavyweight boxing, and I think that there's a few kind of case studies that you can look at, and sometimes that is the best thing to do. So the one that obviously AJ will be looking at is Floyd Patterson. He got knocked out by Ingemar Johansson in a fight that he was meant to destroy Johansson, and very similar to AJ, he got put down 7 times. I know AJ only got put down 4 times, but it was the same sort of thing. As he wasn't out cold, but he was up and he was down, he was up and he was down. And then they had the immediate rematch, and Patterson came in leaner, better at boxing. He was jabbing, he was moving, and he got a spectacular knockout of Johansson. And I think that shows that it can be done, and it can be done properly. And obviously you have Lennox Lewis, who did a similar thing with Hasim Rahman. Yeah. But then the opposite one, obviously, we forget that Muhammad Ali was a 20-1 underdog when he took on Sonny Liston. But then he was so mentally badly beaten that when they took the immediate rematch, he got knocked out in the first round. And I think that it all depends on the psychological strength of Anthony Joshua to bounce back in terms of whether an immediate rematch is or is not a good idea. Because Liston was broken mentally by Ali and he couldn't get back into the fight. Whereas Patterson thought, what's this guy doing beating me? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? He can't beat me. He got lucky. And therefore, I think that AJ has to be more like a Floyd Patterson than a Sonny Liston, and he has to work towards getting his mind right for the immediate rematch. Because if he is in the right state of mind, I think it's a good idea. But I think if he's not in the right state of mind, I think it's a terrible idea. Yeah, definitely.
As a fan, if I look at it from a fan's point of view, I was delighted when he took the rematch. Much like you say there with Floyd Patterson's mentality of who's this guy to beat me, and that's how I wanted to support Anthony Joshua. I wanted him to think who was Andy Ruiz to beat me. I was undefeated going into that fight, and it was a blip. But I also look at the bigger picture, and I think this is certainly something that would have played a part in Eddie Hearn's mentality when he was advising, if he did advise Andy Joshua on the rematch negotiations, is if he didn't take this rematch and those belts stayed in-house at the PBC with Al Heyman and his stable of heavyweights, with Luis Ortiz, Deontay Wilder, Adam Kanaka, it'd be very, very difficult for Anthony Joshua to get a shot back at any version of the heavyweight title without putting in a lot of groundwork and almost starting from the bottom again. I think it was very important for him to take this immediate rematch, right the wrong, and get back on the journey ultimately to the undisputed fight, which undoubtedly is what he's after.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Al Heyman, for all his faults, is a very, very savvy businessman, and he wouldn't want anyone that's not a PBC fighter having those belts. And he would keep, if, obviously with the rematch clause, Anthony Joshua could have triggered it, but if he hadn't, like you say, I think it would have been a very, very difficult road back. But then again, I go back to, is that the right reason to call one? If it's for business reasons and not fighting reasons, it might be difficult for AJ, because if he doesn't think he can win, but for business reasons the fight is called anyway, it might be kind of really difficult for him to get back in there. You know what I mean? I think to make a fight for business reasons rather than fighters' reasons will always favour, your Eddie Hearns, the Al Heymans of the world over the Anthony Joshuas of the world. I think obviously we'll never be privy to this, but if AJ wasn't sure and business made it happen, I think that's a very bad thing for AJ going into this rematch.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point to make. And like I say, unfortunately, when they're going to be in a position to find out exactly if that was ever a part of his reasoning. But of course, moving on, we got the rematch, and then there was a lot of umming and ahhing about Andy Ruiz wanting X amount of money, X amount of millions of dollars to get this rematch, and there was talk of him playing hardball. Eddie was adamant that no matter what, it's a watertight, I think his expression was, it's a watertight rematch clause, and there could have been severe financial implications had Andy Ruiz attempted to not take this fight. So yeah, it was signed. Ruiz eventually played ball, and then the next big obstacle, as it were, or the next big point of drama was location. Of course, we know where it ended up, but let's go back to before it was announced. In your mind, Ewan, where do you believe this rematch should have taken place?
Well, Saudi Arabia definitely was not on my shortlist where this fight would have taken place. I always thought going up to this there was one option. I thought it was Wembley Stadium. I thought that the matchroom lawyers are the best in the world. Like, outside of, because obviously Bob Arum's a lawyer at Top Rank and he does all his own in-house stuff, but Eddie Hearn has hired top quality world-renowned lawyers. So I knew that they had the good hand going into the renegotiation. So I thought they would have only one place to pick it. I thought, his biggest knight's Klitschko, and I thought it would just be the sensible option for Matchroom. And knowing they held the cards, I thought that there was only one option, and I thought it was Wembley Stadium, or possibly the Principality in Cardiff, because obviously that's their home ground as well. But yeah, I always saw this fight in Britain, and I always hoped it was in Britain. To be honest, as a British fight fan, I thought I might have been able to get a ticket, but it's exactly that. I always thought that Matchroom would try and push it back to the UK, and when Saudi got announced, it kind of blew me away a little bit. I was a bit confused.
Yeah, so obviously the announcement, to go out to Diriyah, it was a groundbreaking decision. But just before we discuss that, personally, I thought that the fight should have been back at Madison Square Garden. I think he should have gone back to the scene of the crime. Leave no questions, no home advantage, no reason for Ruiz to question the result or the outcome of any rematch, and claim foul play. I would have loved Anthony Joshua to come back over to MSG, even if it meant getting up at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, and paying for pay-per-view again. I would have loved to see him put an exclamation mark next to that victory, if he does indeed get the victory. I would have liked to have seen it back in New York.
I think that's a really bold statement, and that would have been a very, very bold thing for Anthony Joshua to do. I think it would have been a real statement of intent and to stamp his authority on it. But then the other point that I wanted to make about, obviously where it ultimately ended up, Saudi Arabia, there's been a lot said about, their human rights and their war in the Yemen and things like that. But, Mobutu Sese Seko, who was the dictator in the Zaire in 1974, was no saint either. And I think that those exotic locations, obviously Muhammad Ali, pioneered this, but he had fought obviously Foreman in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Joe Frazier in the Philippines, and Joe Bugner in Malaysia, which is one that people often forget. In Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, he fought Joe Bugner. And I thought that Saudi Arabia actually might be able to create, and the stadium looks amazing, that kind of atmosphere, that kind of spectacle that the eyes of the world are on this exotic place. I thought the more I see of the stadium and stuff, despite the politics of Saudi Arabia, the more I start to like the idea of it being there.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I was about to mention there that you did put that tweet out mentioning about the Muhammad Ali fights in Zaire and everything else. And it is a valid point. As it is, people are always going to criticise and have, obviously valid points as why it shouldn't be in Saudi Arabia. The political side of things is something. As a fan of boxing, I do try and steer away from. But ultimately, it's still a factor. And the fact that it did get announced for Saudi Arabia plays in part with what I believe I wanted to see from Joshua going back to New York, and that's not giving Andy Ruiz any reason to think Joshua's got any one-up on him, any advantage. And, this is an even playing field at the end of the day. They're both travelling somewhere that they've never boxed before. Hundreds of miles, thousands of miles away from home. And yeah, it just sets an even battlefield and a playing 50-50 setting for the fight. And I do think, the more I do look at it, and you see the stadium, the setup, 99% complete, and it's a stunning setting. I'm not too sure, how it's going to play out when they blast out Sweet Caroline, there's no Carlsberg, or whatever other type of lager people drink at the boxing, to help people have that Dutch courage to sing along, so I think that's going to be really interesting to see how the atmosphere for such a momentous occasion, such a huge fight. I'm really intrigued to see how that plays out.
Yeah, again, I don't know how it's going to be. It's, obviously George Groves and Joe Gallagher have both said it was a kind of bizarre place to box when obviously Callum Smith fought George Groves in it was a different place, wasn't it? It was Ridger, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce it. But they said it was weird. But I'm just waiting to see. My only qualm with it is why clash on the dunes? I think dust up in the desert is far better. But I'm not employed by Matchroom, but there we go.
Yeah. So of course, then if we move on to the actual fight as a spectacle, and we'll just kind of break down between us, and we'll move on to a prediction eventually. But we'll break down how you think each man will be approaching this fight, going into fight week, and ultimately, stepping between them ropes, and duking it out again. So if we let's start with Anthony Joshua, obviously the challenger. How will his mentality be different as he approaches this fight, do you believe?
I hope it's like I say, I hope it's a Floyd Patterson mindset. I hope it's, why on earth has this guy beaten me? He doesn't deserve to have beaten me. And he can go in positive. In terms of what I want to see from Anthony Joshua, it's what I've already seen on the kind of social media and stuff. I think it's a good omen. Is the kind of, he had the Rocky IV beard and not shaved hair and the Spartan look about him, which is this kind of focus you need. Obviously, Lennox Lewis came in with the same sort of, he kind of had a big beard when he came for the first press conference for the second Rackman fight. And obviously, we all know how that ended, one of the best right hands in history, yeah. But I think that Anthony Joshua needs to come in slim, lean, fast, long, and he needs to use that jab right hand that we talked about. He needs to use lateral movement, footwork to keep the smaller man off him. And I think that that's what I would like to see from Anthony Joshua is what I'm already seeing. I'm feeling good about the way he is presented thus far as like skinny. And for want of a better word, he needs to be fast and lean because he was a big, heavy stationary target for a fast Andy Ruiz in the last fight. And I think he needs to be a moving target. He needs to be on his back foot, jabbing and moving. I think that is the key for him to win this fight. And he looks to be doing that. He looks obviously muscular as ever, but he looks leaner and faster. And I think that is a good omen for Anthony Joshua. And like I say, echoes Floyd Patterson, who did the same. He came in like 15 pounds lighter to that second Johansson fight to try and be less of a stationary target. And I think Anthony Joshua is following that model and looking really good at the moment.
Yeah, of course. So, looking at, like you say, you mentioned there how you'd like him to approach the fight. Something that has crept into my mind when I look at especially the first fight, and how I wanted him to do certain things that he just wasn't doing, and if he could bring these things into the second fight, which I think is a Klitschko style performance, a jab, grab, jab, right hand, and keep it at range, keep it comfortable, be very calculated and be very sharp, you've got to be precise, yeah, that's how I'd like to see him approach it, for the want of a better breakdown. I just think a Klitschko at his peak, Vladimir Klitschko at his peak is the game plan I'd follow for Anthony Joshua going into this fight.
I think that's a really good point. I think that the whole, Klitschko wasn't champion for 12 years or something. He was champion with that style for a reason, because people couldn't beat him.
Yeah.
And, I think that Povetkin, obviously we saw Povetkin AJ is a similar kind of style. And, he did that against Povetkin. It was jab, right hand, grab, jab, right hand, jab, grab.
Yeah.
And then with the occasional left hook and ultimately put him down and won that fight. And I think that is exactly the sort of performance. I think it's a great parallel to draw in terms of how AJ should box. But Vladimir was always leaner than AJ anyway. And I think that, my point about him coming in kind of lean and fast will play into that game plan that you've alluded to.
Definitely. Do you believe Anthony Joshua will have the discipline to adopt different tactics and stick to these different tactics if need be for 12 rounds? I suppose, to answer my own question in a way, he kind of shown that against Joseph Parker, where he didn't really engage at any point. He was happy to show his superior boxing skills, as it were. But in such a highly charged bout, he feels like he has got the world against him. He'll feel like he'll want to prove everybody wrong. Do you think he can keep his discipline if needed for 12 rounds?
I mean, obviously he has, like you say, the Parker fight. He's shown that he can do it, and he did it. He boxed to orders. It was a pretty dull fight, but like I say, he did a Klitschko box to orders, jab and grab. But then for every Joseph Parker, you've got a Carlos Takam or an Andy Ruiz or a Dylan White or a Vladimir Klitschko where he gets drawn into a scrap. And ultimately, I think he does love a scrap. Some boxers just like it. They just like getting in and letting their bombs go and taking some bombs. And I think that there's a lot more form for AJ to do that than there is for him to box to orders. But there is form for both. And I think the sensible thing to do would be like what you alluded to, like the Parker fight. But I think there's always a chance with someone like Andy Ruiz who can catch you that you'll get drawn into a fight. And this is something that I'm again, like you were, I'm on the fence, because if he can box to orders, great. But sometimes I think back to that Dylan White fight where he let it get to him, he let the emotion get to him. And, if he boxes to orders, he beats Dylan White 10 times out of 10. That Dylan White that he fought for the British title. But he got tagged, he got hurt, it was an absolute war because he couldn't box to orders because he just wanted to scrap the lad. Like, he just couldn't do anything other than, like, I want to land on you, I want you to land on me, and let's just have a go. And for a fan, that's great. I love it. I love it when he gets drawn into a scrap because I'm jumping up and down wherever I'm watching it. But ultimately, I'm not sure if he can box to orders. I hope so. As a fan, I want him to win the title, but I think it's a really interesting question going into this rematch.
Yeah. So looking at Andy Ruiz now, obviously the champion going into the fight. What does Andy Ruiz change, or what do you think, if anything, needs to change? What's his approach?
I don't personally think he needs to change anything. I think he if you've knocked out the reigning unified heavyweight champion and you've knocked him down 4 times, I think there's very little you can change. It doesn't get much more solid of a performance than that. I think I think that Andy Ruiz will do exactly what he'll be, a fat lad that punches hard and he punches fast, and I think that that's always going to be his game plan, and I can't see him or Manny Robles changing anything. But again, I don't think they need to. What more can you ask of him than coming in and giving us one of the biggest upsets in heavyweight boxing history? I mean, what about you? Do you think there's anything he needs to change in relation to AJ's changing?
To be honest, I think a lot of Andy Ruiz, his approach seems to be based loosely on what he thinks Anthony Joshua might do. I just think he believes he has the answer, no matter what. He has every right to have that mindset because he's beat him, he's knocked him out. Like you say, he caused the biggest upset since Buster Douglas knocking out Mike Tyson. Some might argue that it was a bigger upset. So yeah, he doesn't need to change anything. I think this whole idea that he lost too much weight, it alludes to what we mentioned about the original fight week for the first fight, and without meaning to, is Andy Ruiz playing mind games? Does he want people to think that he's lost the weight? And then does he want Anthony Joshua to change his mindset maybe? And then it sets up that whole idea of, is this mind games? Has he actually lost the weight? Because then he come out and said, no, I've not lost as much weight as what people think. But then the picture looked considerably slimmer.
I think it's really interesting. I think that again we'll just have to wait and see. I can't guess at what both, because Anthony Joshua might take his top off and he might be absolutely ripped full of muscles again, and Andy Ruiz might take his off and he might be really slim. You don't know. I mean, I've seen a few clips of them sparring and hitting bags and things recently, but you never know when they're from, and you kind of physique-wise, I don't think you can gauge it, and I'm just really excited to see what people have changed and where they end up on fight week. I think it'll be, a massive talking point going into that fight on Saturday night.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as we've mentioned before, we're no experts and we're in no position to reckon anything these guys do, but we're entitled to our opinion, and in my opinion, I think it'd be very foolish for Andy Ruiz to lose anything more than half a stone, if he was to lose anything at all from that first fight. I think if he comes in, if he attempts to come in lean, I think the punch resistance maybe could be affected, and then obviously the power on his own shots might be reduced if he does come in too light, because he's not the tallest of blokes, so.
Yeah, I mean, if he sheds too much weight, he'll end up as a cruiserweight. He's not big at all. Like he doesn't carry the size of an Anthony Joshua or Wilder or Fury. He's not that big. But like you say, I think his punch resistance was absolutely faultless in the first fight. He took absolutely everything on the chin, and he took it and he carried on. So you'd hate to see him lose any of that. And I think, like you say, losing some weight might cause that.
Yeah, definitely. Looking away from the physical side of things, the training and everything, looking at Andy Ruiz's mentality, regardless of what he might say, in your opinion, do you think the hunger is still there, the desire that he had, to reach the top of the mountain? Do you think it's still there to stay at the top?
I mean, it's Marvin Hagler, isn't it, that famously said it's hard to get out of bed and go running when you're sleeping in silk pajamas.
Perfect.
And I think that there was a case for that, of Joshua doing that in the first fight, failing to get up, and I think there's absolutely a chance that Ruiz might be doing it in this fight. It's when you've won everything, suddenly you're happy, and you put on the weight, you go out drinking, you go out partying, and it's easy to lose that kind of mindset. And I think that again, we won't know until a fight, but it's easy to do. We go back to Buster Douglas. His next fight was against Evander Holyfield. He got knocked out in a round, and he weighed 30 pounds heavier than he did in his fight with Mike Tyson. It's easy for that fame to go to your head, and that lack of discipline to seep in when you've got the money, when you've got the fame, when you've beaten the man who beat the man. Do you know what I mean? It's easy for that to creep into your mindset and affect your performance on the night.
Yeah, I think my point of view on that angle is if we go back to the fact that he was, of course, the late replacement, but like any heavyweight boxer, any boxer on the planet, they have ambitions of being a world champion. But I don't believe Andy Ruiz without Jarrell Miller pulling out that fight and the need for a late replacement was ever anywhere near a heavyweight title shot. In terms of, if he'd fought Jarrell Miller, I think the undisputed fight and everything else was coming next. So then for him to not only get the fight and get the purse that came along with it and everything else with going on to win the fight could easily replace, the desire, because this was, it was almost like winning the lottery. It wasn't something he'd worked into mandatory position and he was expecting the shot, and then he had plans for reigning over the division. Of course, every boxer, as I say, wants to become world champion, but this wasn't something that he was knocking on the door for. This was given to him, and he, like I say, fair play to him. He went out there and he won the fight, and he deserves the millions and the pounds or dollars that come along with it and all the plaudits. But he wasn't expecting it, and I think he's in more of a vulnerable position at that point.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a really interesting psychological element that you talk about with the lack of a preparation, that mental preparation of I'm going to be world champion, I'm going to be world champion. The way that Joshua had, he was always groomed to be the heavyweight champion of the world. Andy Ruiz hasn't had that, and when it comes, how has that affected him? I mean, we'll never know. But I think it's a very interesting point.
Definitely, and there was a quote, and I actually scribbled it down as I heard it, and for the life of me, I can't go back and find out where it come from. But it just simply says, "Money shouldn't matter, the passion has to be there," and I think that applies for both boxers going into this fight.
Absolutely, you've got to have a fire. You've got to have the proverbial fire under your ass. You've got to be able to be something get you out of bed every morning. Alluding back to Hagley, you've got to get something that makes you go and do road work at 5 a.m. Something that makes you want to do it, and it's who has that and who's worked harder, but also who just gets in that ring and has that fire, has the eye of the tiger, not to be cliched, but who has that when they get in the ring. And I don't think we'll know that until Saturday night.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the sport that we love. That as long as these two guys get in the ring, all questions will be answered, and that's something that's fascinating about boxing. If you try and translate it to other sports, you worry that if certain football teams are playing, maybe that the star players might be injured or might be rested or whatever. But with boxing, that barring injuries, when these two guys get in the ring, all questions will be answered. And that's the beauty of the sport that we love.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Chris Eubank, as much as everybody laughs at him, he talks about pugilism and the fact that the beauty of the sport is that the better man always walks out the winner. No boxer has ever been a worse man in the night and won the fight outside of something like a judge's robbery. The better man always walks out of a boxing ring with his hand raised. There is no excuses. There's nobody in there helping you, doing it for you. And that's what I mean about McCracken is McCracken couldn't do it for him. At the end of the day, Anthony Joshua lost because Anthony Joshua lost. Andy Ruiz won because Andy Ruiz won. And it's this Saturday night it will be who's the better man going in, who's worked harder, who's more focused, who's got that eye of the tiger, who's more lasered into the fight, who's got a better game plan. And whoever has all those things, puts them all together more fluidly, they'll win the fight.
Yeah, perfectly put there, Ewan. And moving on to our official predictions. As a fan, I'll take the bull by the horns here. I said back after the first fight that I do believe, and it kind of, it's a hypocritical thing to say, because he just lost to Andy Ruiz, but I do believe Anthony Joshua on his best night, and Andy Ruiz on his best night, Anthony Joshua, again, I contradict myself because I'm saying he should beat him, but I do believe the best version of Anthony Joshua beats the best version of Andy Ruiz. I think if he stays behind his long jab, if he takes the fight away from Andy Ruiz, and it sounds so elementary because we've mentioned it before, but jab, grab when needed, and that's something that we didn't see. He's trying to grab and hold on in the first fight, and it wasn't effective. I hope that he works on that, and then he pops the right hand down the pipe. He sets it up with a feint. And he anticipates the counter punches of Andy Ruiz. It's all easier said than done, but he's had so much time to work on it. But I believe that Anthony Joshua wears him down, breaks him down, beats the fight out of him, and I believe Anthony Joshua stops Andy Ruiz in the 8th round.
That's a very bold prediction. I like it. I as an Anthony Joshua fan, I love the sound of that. But the more I talk and the more I think about it, the less I can see it going two ways. And I will settle on a prediction, I promise. But the first way it goes, I agree. I think Anthony Joshua's long and lean, and I think he fights like he fought Joseph Parker, jab and grab, left hand, gets caught a couple times, but manages to edge out a unanimous decision victory by Vladimir Klitschko and him. Jab and grab, right hand, stay away, lateral movement, or it goes the same way as the first fight, but faster, because Andy Ruiz has that psychological edge. He knows he can stop Joshua, he knows he can hurt him, but he knows that Joshua can't hurt Ruiz, you know what I mean? Yeah. I think that he might come out like a bull in a china shop and catch him really early and catch him cold, and I think that my official prediction is going to be an Anthony Joshua unanimous decision in a fight that is not nearly as exciting as the first one. But I can absolutely see Andy Ruiz knocking him out between 2 and 4. I think that is absolutely on the cards and could well happen. But again, I'll stick my flags with the Brits. I'll go with Anthony Joshua, but I'll go with a kind of lackluster unanimous decision, keeping him at range and using that jab. It's hard to do.
Yeah, I think I'll quickly just add a quick disclaimer that if and as an Anthony Joshua fan, such would, Andy Ruiz was to knock him out, as you say earlier, I wouldn't be surprised. I just want to put that in there, I wouldn't be surprised. But my prediction again, Anthony Joshua, 8th round knockout, but I wouldn't be surprised. I want it to.
I like it.
But I wouldn't be surprised.
I like it. It's very bold.
Yeah,
so obviously we've got a massive undercard out in Saudi Arabia with one big name added this week.
Yeah, and I know this is something, from speaking to you beforehand, you was eager to talk about, something I'm looking forward to hearing, your research and your thoughts on. Let's get right to it. It's the undercard overview, and no better place to start than Dylan White, and he's obviously fighting Marius Wack. The mic is yours, Ewan.
Well, I did a little bit of reading, and I found out that if you Google anti-doping, if you put anti-doping into the search bar of the British Boxing Board of Control website, it quite helpfully comes up with, there are no results found for this page. And I thought that was rather telling as I did my research, but I'll tweet that out later. That I've got a picture of that. But the other thing, if you go onto the UKAD website, there is a confidentiality clause, which is Section 2.1 of the National Anti-Doping the UK National Anti-Doping Rules and Regs. It's Section 210, and it's basically saying that nobody can breach an open investigation, which to me suggests, because there is radio silence, that this is still an open investigation. Okay, but then it contradicts itself in Section 25, which is that the World Anti-Doping Code suggests that they will have evidence within 3 days of receipt of a laboratory documentation package as to what was in the sample. So, as much as they're saying it's confidentiality for an open case, they should have had the case closed within 3 days. So, I'm more confused than when I started researching, to be honest. But I don't know what the Dylan White situation is. I've tried to work it out, but ultimately I think it's a legal quagmire between Eddie Hearn, the British Boxing Board of Control, and UKAD. I think it's pretty complex. I don't know what your thoughts would be on that.
Yeah, it's difficult because it should have been cleared up a long time ago. Whether you're a fan of Dylan White, whether you're not a fan of Dylan White, and it does split opinion. I am a fan. I've got to say I'm a fan of Dylan White. But this, it's a blemish on his name. It's a blemish on the fight against Oscar Rivas, which, barring the knockdown, I think it was in the 9th round, was a great win. It put him in a WBC mandatory position. Finally, we thought we was in, touching distance of a world title shot, and then, the rug was pulled from under the feet of not just Dylan White and Eddie Hearn, but us as fans, the guys that stuck with him, through the early tribulations, and drug accusations early doors, and then obviously the loss to Anthony Joshua, he rebuilt. He's rattled off 10 consecutive wins since that Anthony Joshua defeat, and I think some of the quality of the wins in there, for him not to have received a world title shot of sorts before then, is a crime within itself. But if we're looking at the time between the Rivas fight and now, it should have been cleared up a long time ago. I don't understand why Eddie Hearn says, I can't talk about it, or I can say so much, or he's cleared to fight. Prove that he was cleared to fight, prove that there wasn't something there, or, it's been mentioned before, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came out that he served a ban and it's been backdated. It's happened before. And I'm going off on a bit of a rant here because it is something that is very frustrating, and it leads to so much back and forth on Twitter repeatedly because there is no definitive answer, so no one technically is wrong in what they're saying.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm a massive Dillian Whyte fan. I think he's brilliant, and I think that in the ring he's brilliant, and he should have had a world title shot 2 or 3 fights ago. But also in defence of Dillian Whyte, as much as I've said, obviously he is up for a violation. Actually, he's never been found openly guilty by anybody. Nobody's published a finding that says he's been guilty after the Oscar Rivas fight. Yeah. Thomas Hauser, who, for all my respect for Thomas Hauser, is not a drug testing expert. He's Muhammad Ali's biographer. He's a boxing journalist. He's not an official. And Dillian Whyte has passed every VADA test, which is the world anti-doping that he's ever taken, and he's still listed on VADA as a clean athlete. And he's even in a VADA banner advert for clean athletes. So VADA are the biggest world anti-doping body in the world. They are the premier anti-doping body in the world, and they're blasting out Dillian Whyte as a clean athlete. So I think it is an interesting kind of, in his defence, these things would not stand up if it was in a criminal court, for example. Obviously he has, the evidence against him isn't damning, and there is evidence to his favour that he's passing VADA tests. So it's one of those things that's still up in the air, and obviously I totally agree with you that we should have had an answer, but I think it is an interesting situation. Interesting, not necessarily in a good way, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think we can, I'm happy to leave that behind now, and the sooner it all gets cleared up, the better, in my opinion. Then, the more likely we see Dillian Whyte fighting for world titles where he belongs. So
certainly, I can, second that. So if we just look at this, as briefly as just a boxing match, I'm excited to see Dillian Whyte back in the ring. I'm excited to see him on such a high platform, and I don't believe Marius Whyte provides any kind of problem that Dillian won't solve. And a brief prediction, I think Dillian Whyte stops him concussively and makes a bold statement, and then, like you say, moves on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, I totally agree. Obviously, he's 2-3 in his last fight. He's won 2, lost 3 in his last 5 fights.
Yeah.
I think he's not a world level opponent by any stretch. In his last 5 fights, he's been stopped. Has 2 stoppage losses. One to Martin Bacoli, who is very good, but he's domestic level heavyweight at the moment.
Yeah.
And Jarrell Miller, who obviously was on drugs, but isn't particularly talented in my opinion. I think he was an okay world title challenger, but he's not the level of Dillian Whyte. And I agree with you. I think Dillian Whyte will stop him inside of 4 rounds. I think it'll be an absolute demolition job. Yeah. I think that Dillian Whyte's angry and frustrated, and he's going to take it out on Marius Whyte.
Fantastic. So just and briefly, I'm conscious of time with everything, but looking at the other 2 heavyweight fights on the bill, one that I am intrigued by, Hrgovic against Molina. It's a step up of sorts for Hrgovic. Molina, I'm not going to say he's not the Molina of old, because I've never watched Molina, not to sound disrespectful, and been impressed. He's got a couple of wins on his record, but ultimately when he steps up to the very elite, he's been knocked out. He did pose Wilder a few problems, but anybody with a boxing brain of sorts like poses Wilder problems until he tags him with that right hand, of course. Whereas Hrgovic, I'm really excited about. I think he's a really good prospect. And again, similar to Dillian Whyte, I'm excited to see Hrgovic on such a big platform, and hopefully looking to make a statement.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Hrgovic is a dark horse at the moment. You know, we've got the Bacolis, the Dubois coming through, and I think Hrgovic's name belongs absolutely in that mix. I think he's big, strong, but I think he's deceptively fast. I think he's really got power in those hands, and it's the speed at which he delivers them, like short left hooks on the inside and things like that. I think Hrgovic is going to stop Molina and really make a statement going forward.
Yeah, and the other heavyweight bout that was announced recently, and I'm amazed at this. Tom Little fighting the rumoured anti-Joshua sparring partner that was um, apparently dropped Joshua in sparring, Majidov. That's obviously on the bill as well. What's your thoughts on that fight, Ewan?
I just can't wait for the IFL interviews this week with Tom Little. To be quite honest, I think that he's a hilarious character. He's obviously very lovable, but in the ring, again, no disrespect, Tom, please don't batter me, but I think that he is a subpar fighter. He's not British level, and I think that the Majidov is, as again, I've not seen very much of Majidov, but I think he will probably deal quite handily with Tom Little. But again, I think it's a far lower level than most of the other heavyweight fights on this card, in my opinion.
Yeah, fantastic. So that wraps up our preview.
Sorry to interrupt. The only thing I'd like to quickly jump in was Hunter Povetkin.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was actually the one that I'd missed off. Unbelievable. I don't know how I missed that off because it's a cracking fight. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an absolute cracker. I think they've both obviously got great amateur pedigree and small heavyweights, but I think it'll be a cracker.
And what's your predictions for that fight?
I think they're the same fighter. I think they're very, very similar fighters in terms of their pedigree and their size. But I just think Hunter's fresher, and I think there was a lot of gaps in Povetkin's performance against Hughie Fury. But as Hughie is one to do, didn't pull the trigger, and I think Hunter will pull the trigger and stop Povetkin mid to late rounds.
I think that's quite a bold prediction to think. Hunter will stop Povetkin, which will be a real statement. I do think Hunter will get the win. But personally, I think he'll win a comfortable points decision. Povetkin's wily, he's vastly experienced, and I do think he'll see the final bell. So I think Michael Hunter wins on points and sets up some potentially huge fights for himself in 2020 because the heavyweight division heading into the new year is going to be wide open.
Yeah, absolutely. If Hunter wins this, he's absolutely in contention for world titles. And the same with Povetkin. He's bounced back from that AJ loss, and I think whoever wins this is a legitimate contender for any of those belts.
Yep, definitely. So, something I wanted to add on to the end here, seeing as though it's our debut video, I just wanted to give a special mention to a few other accounts that are out on Twitter, other boxing media outlets that have been very supportive of SimBoxx, as we've recently celebrated passing 5,000 followers. We've really moved on this year, SimBoxx, and a couple of guys that I want to give a shout out to is Sean Bastow and the team at Eat, Sleep, Box and Repeat. Johnson Brown that helps him do the BTR Boxing Podcast. I think they've got a great team there. They're based in Manchester as well. Special mention to those guys, and also the guys at Gloves Red. I think they're based in Scotland. Again, they've advised me a lot as I've looked to manoeuvre SimBoxx into the position we're in at the minute. So, these other guys, and apologies if I miss anybody off, but those two accounts, and obviously the BTR podcast, I'd just like to give a special mention to those guys.
Yeah, great guys, great podcast. But the only other person I'd like to thank is you, Luke. Obviously I'm just an avid boxing fan, and SimBoxx has given me the platform to get my writing and obviously now my voice out there in boxing. And I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity for doing that.
No, it's much obliged, mate. You're a valued member of the team. And alongside that, Sean Normoyle, Aaron Ludford, and Bobby Gunn as well. Complete the lineup at SimBoxx at the minute. And we're going from strength to strength. Not to take it about numbers, but just over the past 3 months, I was looking over the analytics, and the tweets alone from SimBoxx have reached 1.3 million interactions, which is an unbelievable amount. Over 3 months, it's unbelievable. You know, we reached the 5,000 followers, and it's down to the work that we all put in. You know, whether it's the day-to-day tweets, the interviews that we're putting on YouTube, or the articles that you guys write and provide for SimBoxx. You know, it's all valued, and I think we've got a really strong team.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you very much. Right.
Yeah, so that's everything there, Ewan. Thanks for your time, and I'm sure we'll catch up again soon, buddy.
Yep. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.